I think the first time I saw Saturn, I was a teenager, because I didn't know how, when I was a young boy, I didn't know how to find objects in the sky. And very difficult for me, but my friend found Saturn and showed it to me, and it was out in the desert in California, and I was just stunned at seeing the rings, you know. It wasn't very big, it was very small, but I was seeing the rings around Saturn, and it was like a science fiction moment for me or something, you know. It's just amazing.
But your little telescope, I mean, despite the fact that it's tiny and it's inexpensive and all that kind of stuff, it's really small. It's mind-boggling how good a view you get from something that's simple and inexpensive.
That's right.
People don't realize that, you know, that can change their life pretty quickly. I mean, like it did yours, for sure.
Sure, and it does for a lot of people. But what also changes someone's life is it's not necessarily the size of the scope they're using, but it's maybe having someone mentor them a little bit, or them to get some better information for them to find other things, because even with a small scope like that, you could see Orion's Nebula, you could still see the Andromeda Galaxy. You know, there's a lot of things you can see.
Lots of cool stuff.
Lots of cool stuff. And you know, most amateur astronomers that I know, when they were young, had a small telescope. And maybe they didn't do astronomy their entire lives, because I didn't. I had my telescope, and then there were years that went by before I had another exposure to a telescope. It wasn't until like about 1980 that I get really into the hobby, you know. So.
Well, you know what the toast is.
What's the toast?
Long live the children of our parents.
That's good.
Yeah. The name I go by is first initial F, Jack Eastman, going through a security clearance thing that they would not accept the first initial. And I asked the inspector, I said, who is the investigative agency for this business? And he said, the FBI. And I retorted, well, what the hell does J. Edgar Hoover have to say about this first initial business? And those guys have about as much sense of humor as a sunburned rattlesnake. It was Denver, I was in the second grade, and my dad pulled out, he had this big fat book, it was called Gately's Universal Educator, and it had all kinds of stuff in it, geology, there was a section in there on astronomy. In this book, there was a map of the moon. Just fascinating reading about this stuff. What's in the sky, how stars are, what stars look like, planets, the moon. And I read that book, like I say, to death. And that is, I think, where my fuse got lit. We were visiting Knott's Berry Farm, and as we were leaving, my dad saw this little sign that said observatory. Dragged me up there. And it was a little astronomy shop. They had books, and they had a lot of photographs and stuff. And out back, they had a 9-inch telescope. And it cost a dime. My dad coughed up the dime. I went out and I looked at Jupiter and its 4 moons. And that did it. I think that's what really grabbed me by the nose. And like I said, I was terminally hooked. That was it. And while I was at Martin Marietta, I told him I've been to Mars 3 times. I've been to Jupiter, and I've been to one of the moons of Saturn. And the Mars business is our company did the photosensors for the Viking Mars lander cameras. And the Jupiter probe is our group. We did 3 of the science instruments on the Jupiter Galileo mission entry probe. And what I did most of my work on was what's called a methylometer, which is a cloud detection system. We were interested in the properties of the cloud layers in Jupiter, what they are, what they're made out of. If you look at an image of Jupiter, a really good, from spacecraft or some of the guys that are doing ground-based astronomy, there are these little shark fin shaped features on the edges of the main belts. And what they are is clear spaces. You can look down through the clouds Well, doggone it if our instrument didn't go down through one of those and our cloud detector didn't detect a whole lot. The other one, I did about 9 months worth of honest-to-God lens design, and this was an instrument containing 13 very specialized optical instruments that ended up landing on Saturn's moon Titan with the Huygens probe, part of the Cassini mission. It was a heck of a ride, and I have to say this, that I never ever felt like I ever worked for anybody, but rather with people. So it was good. I'd give it an A. Maybe even an A+. And that whole career path was a general result of my involvement in optics and telescope making.
Okay, next one.
Well, you guys have really made out. If you need some help getting that set up to use, make sure you ask. We'll find somebody to help you. Okay?
Okay, well, you're on.
I'm glad to be back here again, guys.
Well, in college, I enjoyed optics very much and didn't do work in optics, but I'm a ham radio operator and I kept going higher in the microwave frequencies. 10 gigahertz was a specialty of mine. I won several contests at that, but then I kept going higher and finally got up to light with lasers, trying to communicate between myself and other hams with lasers. That got me into optics, which was one of my favorite subjects in college. The equipment is a spectroscope for the sun. The sun, if you look at it in a narrow band filter at the hydrogen alpha wavelength, you can see a great deal of activity on the sun. In the spectrograph, what you're looking at is the breakdown of colors from the sun's light, and it's divided into the spectrum. And you can start down in the red, which is very dark, where hydrogen alpha line is, which is a great line for looking at the solar's geography, where you can see prominences and filaments and sunspots. And then you can go up, and two very identifiable lines are the yellow sodium lines, but you'll see all those spectral lines as you run through the rainbow of colors in the solar spectrum. Spectroscopy is a very, very interesting introduction to science. It gets you into the optics, the light that you're using, and you also get into the atomic elemental business that's interesting. The sun, of course, changes, and the fact that 4 billion years from now, the Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way are going to collide is very, very interesting, but I'm not going to be around for it. I am around for the changes in the sun, and that to me is fascinating.